welcome back to the third episode of PHP development. I hope you're enjoying the course so far. In this episode, we're going to learn about the different data types that PHP can offer us. In this particular episode, we're going to learn about integers, floats, and Boolean data types. We're going to learn how to initialize a variable using one of these data types, which in turn will determine what data type the variable becomes. Let's take a look at some code. First, we're going to talk about integers. So what is an integer? An integer is a whole number, like 5 or minus 30. An integer cannot have a decimal point. So 3.0, for example, is not an integer. All right, so now let's take a look at some code. Integers. And let's see how this looks in the browser. All right. All right, let's examine this code for a moment. First, we started with our file with PHP rather than HTML. And in this upper portion of our file, we have created 3 variables. Notice how PHP is different from most other programming languages in the fact that variables must start with a $sign. Perl does that, and I think I may be wrong, but I think that's the other programming language that uses $signs to start their variable names. Also notice that we don't have to give the variable a data type. By assigning an integer to the variable, it becomes type integer. Now let's examine how we include these variables inside the HTML portion of our file. We have our variables inside echo statements, which we have used before. And in this case, they are surrounded by double quotes. You can also use an echo statement with single quotes. But as you will learn in the next episode, when you use double quotes, the variable will expand. And what that means is that the output of this will be the value of the variable. And as we can see here, these 3 echo statements produce this output. There are variable name hours in a year, and the output is there are 8,760 hours in a year. I don't know if you knew that. I didn't, but now I do. Now, integers can hold pretty large values, but there are limits. On 32-bit systems, they hold about plus or minus 2 billion, and which is probably enough for most applications of integers. In 64-bit systems, they hold an incredibly big number, which is about plus or minus 9 quintillion. So that's a big number. 9 plus, I don't know how many zeros after that. All right, we're gonna quickly uncomment this section of our code and see what the output is. Let's save our file, refresh here. And so what is this? The first line, these 3 lines right here, line 22, line 24, and line 26, these are PHP constants. And what they give us is this first one right here will let you know whether you're working on a 32-bit system. So the output of this in my computer is 8, which is a 64-bit system. If you had a 32-bit system, then the output would be 4. And moving on to this next 2 lines, this constant, which is PHP int max, will give you the value of the largest integer a 64-bit system in this case can hold. And in the next line, you see the minimum value of a 64-bit system. And like I mentioned before, on a 32-bit system, these values are lower, about 2 billion. So the number of digits goes up to here or so. And but for most applications, usually a 32-bit system will be enough to hold any integer size that you need. Obviously, a 64-bit system will hold bigger values. Now, in this next section of our file, let's uncomment that And let's take a look at what happens here. What happens when you enter an integer that is bigger than the maximum? So we have our maximum value here, and we're going to add 1 to it. Suppose that sometime into the future, when you become a wildly successful PHP developer, thanks to this course, your fortune becomes the maximum number of integers this system can hold plus 1. Let's see what happens when we do that. Let's save the file, refresh here, and what do we have? We have a number that doesn't look like an integer. It has a decimal point and it ends with e plus 18. What does that mean? Now, PHP has a function called var underscore dump, and when you enter the name of the variable, it gives you 2 pieces of information. The first one is its type, and the second one its value. So what happens when you have what in other languages is called integer overflow? In PHP, it doesn't overflow. It simply becomes a different type. It becomes a type that can hold the larger value, and in this case float. That can be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. But note what happens when you have a value for an integer that exceeds its maximum size. Then that integer becomes a float. Let's talk about floats now. A floating point number, or a double as it's called in other languages, these are numbers that are written with a decimal part. So 3.22 is a float, or negative 0.6, that is also a float number. Now let's take a look at this code right here. Let's open it in our browser. And let's see. Once again, we have PHP at the top of our file, and we have a few variables that we have initialized. Now, each of these variables contain a whole portion in a decimal part. And the fact that it contains a decimal part makes this variable type float. So these first 4 variables, they're all type float. And let's take a look at the way we create a floating point variable. The simplest way is to simply enter a number with a decimal part. It doesn't have to be a monetary value like with 2 digits. It could be any amount of digits. Now there is two different ways also that you can create a floating point variable, and this is usually used for scientific notation. This number, for example, what this number means, so you enter the whole portion, decimal point, the decimal portion, and then followed by a lowercase e and a number, which means that this portion right here is multiplied by e 10 times 10 to the 23rd. This is usually used for scientific notation, but I wanted to show you here because you may come across numbers that initialize this way, and you need to know that they are float. Let's see. Now we have this portion of PHP inside our HTML file, right? Once again, we include the names of the variables, including the $sign inside double quotes. Otherwise, they will not work. We have one echo statement that has 4 lines. We'll talk about this operators more in the next episode. We have a second statement, and then all others are basically the same. And look how this variable in particular, the last one that we initialize here, 3 uppercase E5, see how this is displayed on the browser. It becomes 300,000. Let's talk about Boolean variables now. What is a Boolean variable? Let's open a file here. A Boolean variable in PHP is a variable that can hold only two values, which are true or false, sometimes represented as 0 and -1 in some languages, but in PHP that's not the case. It is either true or false, and we'll see what other values revert to when you're initializing a Boolean variable. All right. Now, Boolean type is the simplest type of PHP. As I mentioned before, it can hold only two values, true or false. These constants are case insensitive. So if you write true with all lowercase and false with all lowercase, they will work just as well. But generally in PHP, names of constants are written in all uppercase, and that makes it easier to distinguish them from regular variables. Now, Boolean variables are mainly used in control structures, of which you will learn in future episodes. But let's examine this code. And let's see what the output is. We have initialized these four variables: is valid, true, is local, false, is over, true, and is red, false. These first three echo statements, right? This is the output of these echo statements. So first we output the name of the variable. On the second line, we use the var_dump function to see what its value is, and in this case it is, I'm sorry, to see what its type is, and in this case it's a Boolean type. Let's take a look at these three statements. The first one is an echo statement that prints the name of the variable, and the second one is the var_dump function, which when you give a variable, what it does is it outputs the type of the variable and its value. In this case, is valid is a Boolean type and its value is true. The same is done for all the other three variables. Is local is Boolean and false. This one is Boolean and true, and is red is Boolean and false. Now, how do we convert integer values to Boolean? Let's take a look at this code. Okay, so what we're doing here is we are creating a variable, bool value 1, and we are initializing this variable to the number 0, and we are converting the 0 into a valid Boolean value. And when we output it, right, we see that the value of this variable is false. Its type is Boolean and its value is false. Okay? If we do the same with a value of -1 and with a value of 4, both values of the variable become true. So what this tells us is that only the integer 0 will create a false value in a Boolean variable. Any other number, including negatives, will create a positive value. The same is true for floats. When you convert float values to Boolean, only 0 becomes negative, as you see here, and negative values, positive values become true. So anything that has a value is generally true. Anything that is 0 is false. And this is true for both integers and floats. We're gonna talk about constants now. So let's go to this file. And how do we create constants in PHP? Well, there's the most common way to create constants is using the define function. And this is the syntax for it. You write define, opening, closing parentheses. This is going to be the name of your constant, greeting, and it has to be enclosed in double quotes. There's some unwanted side effects if you don't enclose them in double quotes. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work the way you want them. So we have 4 constant names here, 4 constants. In the way we give it a value, the way we initialize them, in PHP is called the way you define them, is by putting a comma after the name of the constant and its value. If it's a bunch of letters or words like it is here, you enclose them in either single or double quotes. If it's a number, like an integer or a type float, you can just simply write the number. So we have these 4 constants, and let's see how we use them, how we output them to the screen. This is another way to use the echo statement. Each of these little chunks separated by commas is called an argument, right? And so the echo statement can take as many arguments as you want. You try to keep your statements relatively short. So here we have greeting. This is what is outputted to the screen. Hello world. My name is, and then you have the name constant outputted to the screen. A break line to go to the next line. I am a, and then you have the value of talent, which is in this case Lego Master, and then we have our last statement here. My record solving a Rubik's Cube is, and then the value of record time. All right, so this is the syntax for creating constants in PHP. Now we're going to talk about how some writing conventions when it comes to naming variables, naming constants, how we keep it in a way that is uniform. And usually in PHP, variables are written using what is called a lowercase camel way of writing variables. Constants are usually all uppercase, and this is usually industry-wide. Sometimes if you work for a large company and you have several teams of developers, the company will set its own writing conventions for naming variables and constants and functions, etc. But usually PHP has a defined way of writing variables. Well, this is it for this episode number 3, and I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, see you next episode. Goodbye.